Hi, good evening everybody, and welcome to the daily Rambam Shiur, 3 chapters per day. I remember many years ago, one of our members in Bernard Betel Center, every time I used to ask him, "Was machst du?" Are you doing? In Yiddish, it's being translated, "What you doing?" So he was always answering in Yiddish, "A guten Eindruck as es lostzach," a good impression whenever it's possible. And I was thinking, is to make an impression can be defined as an action. In today's world, indeed, there is so much about presentation, so much in social media about appearance. So obviously, in our world where so much about marketing and packaging and wrapping, so make a good impression is something. The question if halachically as well, and when we're studying today's first chapter of the Rambam, he introduces a new concept in the ruling of Shabbos. While yesterday we covered the reasoning behind the rabbinical restriction and the rabbinical rulings that are pertaining to Shabbos, which are based whether an activity resembles or appears like a biblically forbidden activity, and for that reason they have restricted it, or for another reason, since it may lead in the future to an activity. In today's chapter, he introduces a different type of a restrictive item that was introduced not by the rabbis, but by the prophets. Every Shabbos morning, right before we're reciting the Kiddush, the daily Kiddush by the day, we saying the following psukim. Im toshiv mishabos raglecho, mimtzoi chafotzecho vedaber dovo. If you will abstain from speaking your speech and walking your walk, God Almighty will bless you. Based upon this text, the rabbis restricted even those type of activity that not only it is not biblically forbidden, not only that it's not going to lead to any biblical violation, not only that it's not even looks or appear like a biblical violation, but it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. It is in the spirit of the weekly type of mannerism, type of behavior. For example, when a person discusses his future business planning, so the environment is definitely not a Shabbos environment. When a person runs, jogs, so this jogging activity is definitely not in the spirit of Shabbos. So therefore it's not hiluchecho, it's not the Shabbos walk, and it's not the Shabbos talk. So in order to prevent or to give an individual the ability to celebrate and to stay on Shabbos in the spirit of Shabbos, so some prohibitions were introduced. For example, a person is not allowed to walk in order to get closer. He's not allowed to walk on Shabbos in order to get closer to his fields or to his businesses, so he will be available right MUKTZEH Shabbos, and he will save time of traveling to be able to do his activities. A person is also not allowed to engage in reading material which is related to business activities as well on Shabbos, because again, it's not in the spirit of Shabbos. However, the rabbis limited the restriction only when it's purely done for your sake. But if it is being done for a mitzvah sake, so then even when the nature of the talk may not be purely so-called Shabbosdik, it's okay. For example, if an individual speaks with another professional to hire him to teach his son Torah, that's okay, because again, although the talk is a business nature, but the purpose of the business nature is educational, it's a mitzvah sake. It is also permitted for a person to speak with a shadchan, a matchmaker, and in order to get a proper match for his children. Although again, when you speak with a matchmaker like any professional, it is a business nature type of talk. Yet again, since the sake is the sake of mitzvah, it's permitted. Further than this, a person even he is allowed to go into the theaters or to other central gatherings in order to meet an influential figure, to ask him to improve the living condition of the community, and so on and so forth. I would like to introduce you to an interesting story that is quite famous in the Jewish culture. Maybe you heard it, maybe not, about one young rabbi who was very inspired, very enthusiastic, and he was determined only to improve tremendously and in a meaningful way the spiritual life and condition of his community. And the first thing, when he came to the community, he noticed that there are talking and talking and talking throughout the prayers. He got fed up with it, and he says, guys, if you gotta make a decision. It's or me or your continuous talking. If you want me as a rabbi over here, you gotta stop talking. Okay, they were very much pleased with him, and they wanted to please him as well, so they stopped talking. About a month later, he comes back to shul. He says, whatever the restriction about talking that I've told you, the entire restriction is released. Now you can talk as much as you want in the shul, in the gathering. And they looked at him. He says, are you a rabbi or what? So he says, I'll explain you what happened. Before I came, the only way that Jews met each other was in the shul on Shabbos. And when they met each other, they found out what's going on with their friends. And when they found out that Yankel have lost his job, so immediately they put together the necessary resources to find him a new job and to get him going until he finds a new job, and things were fine. When they realized that Shmerel is sick, immediately they put together the funds that is necessary to get him the best doctor, the best treatments, and things were taken care of. Until I came, and with my excessive religiosity, I imposed the new restrictions of not talking to each other. So Yankel Skaro could have died, and his children could have get sick, and Beryl's family could have lost their entire livelihood, and nobody knew about it. I'm not going to take upon myself the responsibility, the liability that Jewish people from our community are going to get deserted. And for that reason, I'm annulling, null and void my previous restriction. The point is over here is very much in line as we were speaking before, that though Shabbos as a rule, any type of talk or walk that is not Shabbosdik in nature is being restricted, yet while the purpose of the walk and the talk is in order to promote a mitzvah or a communal need or a livelihood of another person, it is permitted on Shabbos. So this is on a nutshell the contents of the first chapter of the Rambam of today.
But not taking during prayers.
That's I just used that as a joke in order to illustrate my points. Of course, not God forbid that I'm promoting over here any talk. It reminds me, once upon a time, my father, Olav Sholem, he met one of the people over here. He asked him, "Do you come to shul to pray or to talk?" He says, "Of course to talk. To pray, I can do it at home." There is an expression, they said, you're not talking about the talk of the Shabbos in Yiddish. Nit Shabbos Geret. Nit Shabbos Geret is always an expression that is associated when you are doubtful whether the talk that you are speaking on Shabbos is at a nature, is it a Shabbos in nature, or it's not Shabbos-dik in nature. So there is the famous story that once upon a time, one Eid turns to another friend of his and he tells him, "Nit Shabbos Geret, but I'm considering to sell my car." And the person turns to him and he says, "Well, Nit Shabbos Geret for how much?" He says, "Well, Nit Shabbos Geret for about 5,000. So he says, "Okay, let me think about that, Nit Shabbos Geret." He comes in the morning and he says, "What's about 3,000 Nit Shabbos Geret?" And he answered him, "Nit Shabbos Geret, I think 4 is a reasonable amount." He comes to him in the afternoon, he says, "Nit Shabbos Geret, maybe we can get to a certain agreement." He says, "Nit Shabbos Geret, it's irrelevant. It was already taken by somebody else, Nit Shabbos Geret." That's sometimes, when people taking this concept of Nit Shabbos Geret to, there is recently one of the Jewish entertainers, he made an entire song and he called it Nit Shabbos Geret is Shabbos Geret. When a person saying that he's about to speak something Nit Shabbos Geret, this itself is like Shabbos Geret. So this is the first topic that we covered in the daily Rambam of the first chapter. And the second chapter is dealing with a term that may be familiar to others. But today we're going to get to the principles and to the general guidelines. And this term is called MUKTZEH. Have you heard the term MUKTZEH before? The literal translation of the word MUKTZEH is designated, assigned. And you will ask, what's the connection between assignment or designation? So typically, there is something that is removed from the conscience, from the intention of an individual, and that's why it's designated from any excess and any usage. And soon we're going to explain how the restriction of MUKTZEH came about and for what reason it became so important that quite a large size of the quantity page-wise in Shulchan Aruch is dedicated to cover all aspects and angles of MUKTZEH. So first of all, according to the Rambam, he defines in his opening statements of the rules of MUKTZEH the following sentence, and this is what he writes. The rabbis have realized if the talk of weekday cannot be the talk of Shabbos, and if the walk of weekday cannot be the walk of Shabbos, how much more so the touch, the sensation, and the action of Shabbos cannot be similar to the action of the rest of the day of the week. And obviously when they say action, they're not referring to those activities that they are biblically restricted. They are speaking about items that biblically they are permitted. But if an individual will exercise the biblical permission, so the spirit of Shabbos and the purpose of the Shabbos will be totally erased and forgotten. If a person will be permitted to exercise his biblical permission and be at home and move items, heavy furniture, heavy loads from one location into another location in his own house, so there is no issues of carrying, in his own house, the entire concept of resting will be meaningless. A second reason, while a person is hands-on involved in touching items, that some of them are their operation of those items may involve in biblically restrictive activities, he may, by forgetting, activate those items, and then he will violate a biblical prohibition. So therefore, a second reason for introducing the concept of MUKTZEH. Then there is a third reason that the Rambam explains why is it so necessary for introducing the issue, the prohibition of MUKTZEH into our halachic life. Because it says some people are retired and they're not doing much of work that they are required to throughout the week. So if the MUKTZEH is not going to be introduced into their life on Shabbos, so literally not going to be any difference between their schedule throughout the week and Shabbos. So what's going to make Shabbos any different? So for those three reasons, the MUKTZEH restriction came in to the picture. And in MUKTZEH itself, there is two general, and each and every one is being subdivided to secondary division. There is what we call organic MUKTZEH, and there is artificial MUKTZEH. Organic MUKTZEH is a reference to stone, sand, items that just by their virtue of their existence, they are removed and designated, and they are restricted for an individual to touch on Shabbos. Then, or for that example, any type of food that is not edible, whether they are not edible because halachically they are restricted, or because they are not edible because they came to such a stage that they are so rotten that they cannot be eaten. So for those items, they are MUKTZEH, and a person cannot move them or touch them on Shabbos. Then there is items that they are utensils, and in utensils themselves there is two types of utensils. There is utensils that they are made in order to use them in permitted activities, for example, forks, knives, plates. Those utensils can be moved and touched on Shabbos without any limitations, no problem. Then there is utensils that they are so precious, for example, a knife of a shoichet, a knife of a moihel, very, very high valued and very precious utensils. So those utensils they are being treated as organic muktzeh. Same way as organic muktzeh, a person is not allowed to touch them. Also, those type of muktzeh, it's called machmas chesroin kis. Muktzeh is a result from chesroin, is a deficiency of devaluation, of a suspicion, a fear of devaluation. What type of utensils you are feared to be devaluated just by touching? A very high, not necessarily high cost, but very unusual, very type of custom-made professional utensils that are not given to others. Then there is those type of equipment that they are not so precious, that they are commonly being used, but their reason, their entire reason is to do a restrictive operation. To do a restrictive operation. It's called kli shemelachto leisur. I'll give you an example. A hammer. The entire hammer is there in order to build and to put nails into the ground. So to put nails, obviously it's a restrictive activity on your Shabbos. But the question, am I allowed to move the hammer? And the answer, for what purpose? If the idea to move the hammer in order to make place for you, it's called letzorech mekoimoi, in order because you want to use the place, that's fine. You want to use the hammer in order to do a permitted activity, it's called letzorech gufoi, or take the hammer in order to support a book on the hammer, that's fine. But if you're taking the hammer letzorech atzmoi, in order to protect the hammer from rain or from excessive sun, then it's a problem. So let's summarize all types of muktzes that we have and all types of movements that is allowed. So when it comes to organic muktzeh, there is no way to move them, no way to touch them. The only way to move them is to redesignate them for the purpose of movement. You redesignating them, or having them in mind before Shabbos to use them, or actually use them before Shabbos practically, so then you redesignating the item for your personal access. This is when it comes to organic muktzeh items. When it comes to artificial muktzeh item, so muktzeh machmas chesroin kis, as we gave an example from those precious utensils of professional sheichet to moihel, today for example even iPhone. So there is no solution, there is no way to use them directly. Like for example, in today's day, an iPhone of an individual is considered a very precious utensil. If a person loses it, he loses his mind. So therefore, no, that's how precious. He's losing his mind, even he has them. While he has them, he's losing his mind. But if he doesn't has them, he will definitely gonna lose his mind. So how much more so it will be considered as a muktzeh machmas chesroin kis. It's called a muktzeh as something that is associated with a loss of value. So then there is no solution. And the third is kli shemelachto leisur, a utensil that generally the operational way that I'm operating is to do a restrictive activity. It will be permitted to use it only for the place, the space that is occupying, or to use it in order to support something on him, or in order to use him in order to do a permitted activity. But it's not permitted to move him in order to protect the hammer itself. Then there is still a way to move a muktzeh, and the only possible ways when it is needed, if he is moving the muktzeh, the item that is muktzeh, via item that is not muktzeh. For example, he using a platform of something that is permitted to hold, and on top of it, while he has no direct contact there is something that is restrictive to hold. So when there is no choice, he can use this solution. There is another way where an individual moves the MUKTZEH item kile'achar yad in a very unusual way. In a very unusual way, under certain circumstances, it will be permitted to move the MUKTZEH on Shabbos. The origins of a MUKTZEH in general, though that the Rambam states when it comes to utensils were introduced after the period of the prophets, nevertheless, the treatment of the concept of MUKTZEH existed even way before. The Talmud in the tractate of Shabbos tells us a beautiful story in connection to the passage that is relating to the words of King Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, the wisest of all men who ever lived. And Shlomo HaMelech writes in his book that it's better to be a living dog than a dying lion. It is better to be a dog who is alive than a lion that is dead. And the Talmud wondering what is he referring to. And the Talmud gives a very interesting answer. That at the time when Dovid HaMelech passed away, and everybody knows that Dovid HaMelech passed away on Shabbos, because everybody knows that at the end of Shabbos we always doing a feast which is called Melave Malke. And the Melave Malke is based on a conversation that Dovid HaMelech were having with God, and he was asking God Almighty to tell him when he will die. And God responded that it is already a decree and there is a decision that never a human being will be revealed the secret when is his expiration day. But after negotiation, haggling, God Almighty agreed only to tell him one piece of information, that Shabbos will be the day of the week that he will die. He's not going to tell him the precise expiration date, but the day of the week that he will die will be on Shabbos. And therefore, by the end of every Shabbos, Dovid HaMelech were making a feast. He was very happy that he has an extra week at least to live. And for that reason, we are referring to the Melave Malke, Seudese, the feast of David Malke Mashiach of David, which is anointed, and from his descendants, the King Mashiach will appear. And the day finally he died on Shabbos. And there is a long story how he died. And when he died, the dilemma, since it was Shabbos, the dilemma that bothered the household of David was two dilemmas. Dilemma number one, that his corpse, which is dead, is lying under the sun. And since a corpse of a dead person is MUKTZEH, what should be done? They cannot move him, but yet it's not respectful to be under the sun in that condition. A second dilemma that bothered them, that the dogs of the household, I guess the guarding dogs, they are hungry. What should we do in order to feed them? So he says like this. So the answer came that as far as to go and take care of the dogs, you can do it very simply. You can just chop a meat and put it in front of them and they'll take care of it. Chop a nevelo. Nevelo is a dead animal and they'll take care of the meat without any specific outstanding, out of ordinary measures in order to solve this problem. But the only way that they will be able to take care of moving the corpse of David HaMelech, which is MUKTZEH on Shabbos, is only via taking a bread, which is a permissible object, or a little infant, and put him in close proximity to David HaMelech. And as we have just learned, that part of the solution of moving MUKTZEH in a permissible way is only when a permissible object is attached to the MUKTZEH, and only that way we are able to move it. And for that reason, the Talmud concludes, this is why the living dog is more precious than the dead lion. The living dog was the actual dogs that they were able to solve the problems without any sophisticated method. But the dead lion, it was a problem to move him since he was in a state of MUKTZEH. So you see from that story that the origins of the MUKTZEH concept was already introduced even by the times of David HaMelech. Though later on the application of MUKTZEH to utensils, and whether permitted utensils, restricted utensils, were a gradual development that started with the exodus out of Babylon at the time of the building of the second temple, when Nehemiah ben Hakaliah, together with Ezra, they came to Israel, and he was taking care on the very loose situation where the newcomers to Israel, unfortunately, they were involved in engaging in commerce activities on Shabbos. And part of his approach to organize and bring a Jewish lifestyle into their life of the newcomers was via sets of some heavy restrictions in the framework of MUKTZEH. Some of those restrictions were lightened up later, but some of it remained. There is an entire argument in the Talmud what was exactly the original restriction and what was lightened up. But nevertheless, as we have just mentioned, that the origins of the concept of MUKTZEH existed still in the time of King David, as the Talmud records in Tractate Shabbos just now. I would like to conclude with a very interesting story in the spirit of what we just spoke before. You know, there is a story about one wealthy person before Yom Kippur. He tells to his broker, he says, listen, tomorrow is Yom Kippur, it's the only day of the year, no telephone calls, no dealing, no business. I'm out. Okay. Comes, he knew that whatever he says, it's a rule, but to every rule there is a Yotze min haklal, exception. And a day later, he sees that his telephones vibrates, and he sees his broker calls him. And he says, I know, you called me at Yom Kippur and this, I know, but the stock that you've just purchased already reached $40, and I think if you will sell it, you will make a ton of money. He says, don't dare sell it, because in our synagogue it's already hit 57. That's talking about Nit Shabbos Geret in the spirit of before. So again, thank you very much for the participating in the Rambam shiur. Tomorrow we will introduce a new concept which is called the concept of Tchumin. Tchumin is boundaries. And this is not that much. It's interesting that MUKTZEH, it is a rabbinical concept, and it is quite largely widely known, and everybody heard about it, and it's widely spread. The concept of Tchumin, it is biblical, but not many people are aware and know about it. So tomorrow we will cover all aspects of the rules of Tchumin. That's the subject tomorrow. Thank you.
Yeah.